Hello and welcome to this edition of Keeping It Real Time. My name is Casey Clayton. I'm the Cloud Real-Time Solutions Specialist with Informatica, and this is your guide to the DIY API Cloud. On this edition, we're going to do a 30-minute API. In this case, it's going to be a vehicle data service. The goal here is to show how quickly you can put together a useful and services-oriented type architecture that can actually bring together multiple data sources and make that available to any internal or external application or partner source that needs to be able to access data, and to be able to do so in such a way that the caller doesn't even need to know where the data is coming from, but you're able to pull it from multiple different sources. And as promised, this is going to be the 30-minute API, so we'll be able to do it relatively quickly. Just to go through, our process input is going to be the INVIN, or the unique vehicle identification number for a vehicle. And then our output data sources, once again, are going to be SQL Server. We've got a database table called VIN data that's got some information related to a VIN number, the related account, which is a Salesforce account, the vehicle year, make, and model. We're going to use that related account information from the SQL Server actually to query into Salesforce and bring back some information from Salesforce, including the account name, account email, and actually we're going to reach into related records and go from the account to the owner to the owner's manager and return that information. And then finally, we're actually going to combine it with some third-party information that we're going to get from Edmunds.com, who provides a REST-based web service that we're going to call as part of our progress progresses, and we're going to return all this data back in one go. The process output is going to be in the form of a process object that we'll construct with Informatica Cloud Real-Time. Use of process objects is a best practice for collecting complex data types. You can see here this is the composite vehicle information. It has all the different fields that we were going to be getting from our different sources, like VIN, year, make, and model, EPA class, mileage, and such. Using process objects like this allow you to just declare it once, but actually be able to populate the various values and not have to worry about declaring a bunch of individual variables in a process. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the demo. I appreciate it. Let's log into Informatica Cloud. Okay, we're going to start at the very beginning and go to Informatica Cloud and log in. It's from Informatica Cloud that we'll be able to access the Service and Process Designer, which is actually where all the real-time functionality lives within Informatica Cloud iPaaS. So the Service and Process Designer will take us to the palette and workspace for Informatica Cloud Real-Time. Now it'll bring you into this space, and you can see that there's a number of different elements here. We'll get into details on a lot of these in other calls, but where I want to hop down to is I want to go into some tag that I made a while back for our vehicle service, so that it shows these are just the components that are related to the vehicle service. Tags allow you to organize your work within Informatica Cloud Real-Time. And as we discussed, there's a few different elements to the process that we're about to build. The first is that Azure database that actually contains the vehicle year, make, and model information. Database connectivity in real time is very simple with Informatica Cloud. You just need to provide a JDBC connection style URL and place the driver file on the secure agent. And then just with simple credentials, you'll be able to log in. And when you publish this connection, it will actually bring in the metadata from that database, all the tables and the fields and the like that we'll be working with. So you can see the VIN data that we're going to be working with is here within that database connection. Beyond that, there's also the admin service connector. This is how Informatica Cloud Real-Time approaches interactions with both SOAP and REST-based APIs. In this case, Edmunds.com. They're a vehicle information service, and they provide a REST-based API for accessing information with a VIN number. So if we can go in, you can see within our service connectors, we're actually able to define a number of business-oriented actions around the web service, and define inputs that allow you to feed these web services in the middle of a process. You would set up the binding so that you can just provide these inputs, make sure that you can properly construct the payload, and then you're actually able to test the output of such a web service in our system. You can see the URL that we sent to make the call, and actually the data that comes back. Here's the full payload of the web service response, And then our tool allows you to pluck out certain elements of the response for use inside your processes. So you can simplify things and say, I want atomic elements like mileage per gallon city, mileage per gallon highway, or you can return entire process objects that actually will let you access whatever element you want in the response later in the process. From here, we actually are going to have the Salesforce connection, of course. That's going to give us the ability to get information out of Salesforce. Now, our Salesforce connector actually reaches out to Salesforce, pulls in all of its metadata, including objects, custom fields, pick list values, record types, record type dependencies of pick list values. All this is supported in design time in our tool. And then the last piece that we have here is just the process object that we created to represent the vehicle record. Process objects are a best practice within Informatica Cloud Real-Time because it allows you to define a canonical set of fields that make up an object that might need to be shared between multiple sources. So in this case, the vehicle, even though we're getting the data from multiple different sources, we defined an object for a vehicle that actually has the data, the year, make, and model, the city and highway that we're going to get from Edmunds, as well as the Salesforce data. So that's what we have to get started with. Let's go ahead and build out the process here. Go ahead and go New Process. And we're going to call this one the DIY Vehicle Service. We're going to leave the applies to here any, so it can be called without any particular context. The only input for this process is going to be the VIN number. We'll want to give it a description, a composite data service for VINs. And we can go ahead and tag it as well. So I'll just tag it with my vehicle service tag. You can see it remembers I had that from before. And then we'll go in. We can configure where this process is going to start. In this case, it's going to be a web service call that's going to trigger this. We can configure certain users or groups for access here. In this case, for the ease of the demo, I'm just going to configure this to be a public service and say allow anonymous access. And then we're going to define the fields. As we mentioned in the PowerPoint, there's just going to be a couple very simple input fields and output fields. The first one you define right here will be the in VIN, or the input VIN number that's going to be sent by whatever calling system, whether it be a web portal or another application. That's just going to be a simple text input. And then our outputs are going to be, as we described, we're going to go ahead and say this is going to be out vehicle data. And now we're going to define the output type of this to be our process object of type vehicle, because it actually has all the fields that we need. So we just need to define one output field of that complex type here. So if I go under objects and then I find process objects, you'll be able to see vehicle. So I'll just define out vehicle data as a vehicle type object. And then I'm also going to include an out message here, so we can include any error messages that may need to go out. Also at this point within the process is where we're going to define our temporary connections to Salesforce and to database. So you access both in a very similar fashion with a query, and so what we're going to do is we're actually going to set up a temporary field for each one for the Salesforce account, the other for the database table, and we'll be able to actually populate these throughout the process and access the data within. So you'll see how this model works. We're going to go ahead and call this one this DB VIN data. And then we're going to define the type on this one. We're going to go once again into objects, but instead of undergoing standard process objects, we're actually going to go under our Azure DB, remember our database connection. And you'll actually see all of the tables on the Azure DB available here. So this makes it really simple to set up a service around a database. So I'm going to go and select VIN data. There's the, so this DB VIN data is going to represent that table there. And then this field here, this SFDC account, is of course going to represent a Salesforce account. So I'm going to go in here under objects. You can see, scroll down, we find Salesforce and account. All right, now that we've got the process all set up and ready to go, we're going to take in the input, the VIN number. We're going to put out the output, which is a process object of a vehicle, and we've got our fields for accessing the data we need to get to along the way. We can go ahead and build out this process. Now the first step that we're going to do is we're going to reach out to the database. And so we'll do that with an assignment step here. We're going to change the step type. You can see there's a number of different step types in our processes that allow you to do different things. We can talk about each as we go through, but in this particular scenario, we're going to use a simple assignment step in order to populate our database field with the record, or actually a reference more likely, to the database data, so that it actually allows us to not just read, but potentially update that information downstream. So we're going to assign to this dbVin data. We're actually going to use a query, and then if you hit add condition here, the system will know that since we're working with the Vin data table, that it's going to show you all of the fields within Vin data. And I could actually show you. Here's the Vin data table here. There's the vehicle identification number of Vin. There's the vehicle make, model, and year, and then this field called related account. So this is the data that we have, and you can see this is all represented in design time here. So I want the row out of this database that has a Vin equal to my InVin. And we'll just go say populate this dbVin data. And great, so we'll execute that query. Now we want to see if we actually found a response, and the way that we do that in Informatica Cloud Real-Time is with data decisions. Now data decisions can be used to compare two values or to see if a certain condition is met. It also can be used to determine if a certain assignment actually populated with any data into that object. And so we'll put a data decision here, and we'll put the data decision actually on this dbVin data. Now because it's an object, it gives us these two options here, is set or is unset. So if is set, it means we have data. Is unset means that that VIN number wasn't found and no data was returned. So we can go ahead and hit apply here. And now from this point, we're going to go ahead and define the various actions on whether it found it or did not find it. And so if it did not find the VIN in the database, this is going to be a pretty short process. And so we can simply go in here and assign to our out message field, say, we'll just call this an error and say error VIN not found. And then we can actually include the VIN number here, so I'll go and say the InVin. So you can include your variables in these sorts of outputs, and we'll say populate error out message. And then we're actually going to go ahead and end the process in this particular circumstance. So I'm just going to select this step and change it to an end step. Now our processes actually have the ability to return a response to the caller and then actually continue running. So just in case you have to worry about your original process timing out, you can actually send, as we call, a synchronous response back. But in this case, we're just going to end the process because we couldn't find the data. So I'll just call it the end of process, hit apply, and then that's that. Now, if we did successfully find some data, let's begin to populate some output fields. Now we're going to go in here and we're going to do another assignment step in this case, and we're going to call this assignment step populate vehicle output data from DB. And then, so what we're going to do, you remember our output object was something called vehicle data. So you see vehicle data here, but remember, because it's a process object, it actually has a number of different fields we could populate independently, and that's what we're going to do. I'm going to go down to out vehicle data, and you see it's got a little arrow, and now these are all the fields within vehicle data. And remember, so we wanted year, we wanted out vehicle data make, out vehicle data model, and then we'll also populate the VIN of out vehicle data at this time. And so we're going to actually populate these output values from our database. So we're going to go in and go field, 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 and then so for year, we're going to go, and just like we were for our object for the output, our database result was an object. And so if we come to this dbVin data, we can go ahead and hit this arrow, see all the fields that came back, and select the one we need for this. So vehicle year, and then we'll go this dbVin data vehicle make, and we'll go this dbVin data vehicle model, and then we'll just go ahead and populate the VIN from the InVin. And then we'll be able to keep adding to this as we go along. But what I'd like to do here is go ahead and just call this process to make sure that we've actually got a working web service in the couple of minutes that we've been working on this here. And then we can go ahead and add the additional elements. So I get rid of that there. There's our outputs. Oh, we'll go ahead and assign out message as well as a successful here. We'll say out message is success. So very simple process at the time. Query, see if we got data. If we do, return it. If we don't, tell us that we don't have that problem. All this done without having to write any code. So we're going to save this process. We're going to publish it. And publishing a process within Informatica Cloud real-time will actually generate a REST and SOAP-based endpoint for your web service. If it happens to be a web-based listener, our file listeners or JMS or other AMQP listeners actually have different types of outputs. But if I go and look at my DIY vehicle service that I just created here that's published, you can see I've got my service URL. So I've got, there it is. So this is going to be the REST service URL that the people will be calling. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and we're going to test it out with an invin of some kind. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this URL. I'm going to fire up my handy dandy REST client here. We'll go ahead and get rid of the old info. This is the URL that we're actually going to go to, DIY vehicle service. That's what I just copied and pasted out. Now, as you recall, our input parameter that we defined for this particular process, if I go back and click on my start step, we have one input field called in_vin. So we're going to need to send that in, and it's expecting it to look like a JSON payload. It's a very simple one in this case, but we'll go ahead and format that. A little bracket here, and we'll say in_vin. And then I'm going to go ahead and cheat a little bit here and grab a VIN number out of this database. We'll take a look and say this beautiful 2003 Chevy Cavalier. We're going to grab this VIN number, and so we'll expect, based on this VIN number, to get this make, model, and year back from this service. So go in here, we got invin. We'll drop that in there like so. Close our payload, close it out, and go ahead and hit send. All right, so you can see our web process actually already returned. We've got the out vehicle data object there and its internal elements, VIN, year, make, and model. So we've successfully got that web service going. That's a success. And you can actually see within our process monitor, within Informatica Cloud, if I go back to the main Informatica Cloud interface and go under monitor and under the service and process console, you can actually see within Informatica any of the processes that have executed, if there were any errors, and actually even all the way down to the execution path that a particular process followed. So if I get in here on this DIY vehicle service, you'll be able to see the information here. So for our next part, we're going to go ahead and enhance this particular service that we have. We're going to have it reach out now to Salesforce to get some additional information, and then from there also call the web service. Now, one of the tricks here with what we're going to do with calling Salesforce is the input of the web service was only a vehicle identification number, but what we need to get to Salesforce is actually an account ID, and within our database is actually where that correlation exists. So we need to call the database with the VIN number to get this related account number to even be able to get at Salesforce. So this kind of stateful processing actually allows us to be able to take information from the beginning of a process and reuse it later throughout the execution. So if I could come in here and back to my process, I'm going to insert a step right here, and it's going to be another assignment step in this case. And we're going to go ahead and try to populate our Salesforce account. And this Salesforce account, just like we did with our database table back there, once again with a query. And I'm going to go ahead and add the conditions. Just like we saw for the database, you're going to see all the fields that we have for the Salesforce account available. This is all brought in, whenever you publish the Salesforce connection. What we're going to try to match up is very simple. In this case, we're going to go with the account ID. and then we're going to go ahead and say where the account ID equals, what it's going to be is it's actually going to be this DB VIN data related account. So it's going to grab that information from the DB VIN data related account, something that we didn't know at the beginning, and use that to query out to Salesforce here. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the title, populate this Salesforce account. Now, just like we did for the database, we'll go ahead and insert a data decision here. We're going to put it on this Salesforce account, is set or is unset. If it's unset, we're actually just going to grab this error message. We're going to copy it. We're going to paste it. And then we're just going to alter it slightly. We're going to say VIN not found in Salesforce. Or actually, account not found in Salesforce. And we'll have the InVIN, and we'll also include the Salesforce related account. So if I go to this DB VIN data and related account, so our error message is as helpful as possible for Salesforce. Now, if it is set, we're going to go ahead and populate those values like we did before. We're going to go to the out vehicle data, and we're going to say the account name, and we're going to go out vehicle data. We're going to go account email, and we're going to go out vehicle data and account supervisor. And now these are all going to come from the Salesforce account object in this case. We're going to say the account name is going to come from this Salesforce account, and then account name, very simple. Same for email, so this Salesforce account email. That's in here somewhere. Billing email, there we go. And then the account supervisor, so this actually is not in the account record itself. This takes advantage of our ability to look up to related fields and go in and say, I want to go into this Salesforce account, but what I really need is the owner's manager first name or full name. So you actually can go in and drill up to any related objects without creating a bunch of formula fields or create complex SQL queries to get this information. All you need to know is the main object, and we can reach out and grab the other ones at the time that we need it. So we're going to say full name here. We're going to call this one populate SFDC output fields. All right. And now from there, we're actually just going to go ahead and we're going to call the web service here. So after we've called Salesforce, we might as well actually test and make sure that our Salesforce call is working good for us. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to grab one that I know I have a related account for. So I'm going to grab this. We're going to come back. We're going to save, and we're going to publish. So we haven't changed our URL at all. We've actually created a new version. You'll see in the process monitor that we actually do create a new version for each process as you move along. If we come in here, so it's published our process. We're going to come back to our REST client, and we're going to go ahead and drop in this particular VIN number that I was able to copy. And so now it's going to reach out and hopefully grab some additional information for us. Excellent. So there's the year, make, and model from the database. Now we have the account name, email, and supervisor from Salesforce, all based off of this particular vehicle identification number. Now let's say I got this wrong. Let's say this 8, I mistyped it and we put in a 9, for example. You can see there's the VIN not found. There's that error message that we were talking about earlier. So you can, the branches are definitely working. We're going to go ahead and put this back, and then we're going to do the last piece of our composite web service, which is actually to call another web service as part of this and bring back some information from it and include it in the output. So here, instead of doing an assignment, we're going to do what we call a service call step within our tool here. You can see, remember that Edmunds service connector that I showed you earlier with the get vehicle by VIN. It's got an action on it that takes input for vehicle ID, and we're going to utilize this in our process. So I'm going to say service call. I'm going to go to Edmunds API. I'm going to go get vehicle by VIN, and so it tells me what the input is and what the outputs will be. I go ahead and say the inputs for the service call are just going to be simply the in VIN. It could be some other value from something we picked up along the way, but in this case it's just a vehicle identification number is all we need. So we'll go ahead and hit apply. That service call is going to occur, and so after the service call occurs, these variables here, the output fields, will actually become available to any step further on down the process. So by coming in here and doing an assignment, I can grab populate the last couple fields on our output. So we'll go out vehicle data, and we'll say, let's see, what was it, MPG city, and then the out vehicle data MPG highway, and out vehicle data what was the EPA class. So we're going to populate these values from the outputs from Edmunds. So I go field and say MPG city is the Edmunds MPG city. Field MPG highway, likewise, and EPA class. So all these values are coming from the web service. We keep populating fields, the same out vehicle data that we started populating in the beginning of the process. We just keep adding more and more fields to it as we go along. And so we'll just say populate output web service fields. Go ahead and get rid of this last step. We'll hit save. So this should be our complete process as we were describing earlier. It's going to go to the database, it's going to go to Salesforce, it's going to go to the web service, and hopefully return all the values that we need. So I'm going to publish this to make sure we have the latest version available. Now while that's publishing, I can actually show you in our processes all the different executions that we've had. And if we want, we can actually turn on some additional logging. So if I come in here to my properties and I go advanced and I turn the tracing level onto verbose, we can go ahead and save this, publish it. This will allow you to see the actual values of the process within the process. You may want to shut this off in production so that you don't have a potential exposure to data, but this actually is a great tool for debugging some of these things. So I've published this particular service. I'm going to go ahead and execute it one more time. Hopefully we're going to get a couple more fields in addition to what we got last time. So I'll hit send. And there we go. That's our complete composite output. The out vehicle data, has the VIN. There's our year, make, and model. The EPA class, mileage for city, highway, and mileage city, sorry, and account name, account email, account supervisor. All in all, I believe our composite web service was a success. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, please reach out to your Informatica Cloud field rep or myself, Casey Clayton, which is C Clayton, CCLAYTON, @informatica.com. Thank you very much.